Welcome everyone to Accessibility Talks for February, I believe. AmyJune is our speaker today. And AmyJune, I've known her for a little bit, but her professional title is that she's been active and participant in the open source community for over 3 years. She's a self-described non-coder, but she's still been on the top 20 contributor to the Drupal project 2 years in a row. So that's pretty exciting for a non-coder especially. As an open source community ambassador for Canopy Studios, she believes in removing barriers to entry and is passionate about accessible and inclusive information for all. Outside of doing work, she enjoys mycology.
That's mushrooms.
Mushrooms, all right. Geocaching, and has a love for air-cooled Volkswagens. Welcome, AmyJune.
Hi. Hi. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. And does everyone see a bunch of Drupal drops?
Yes, we do. Okay,
great. So I thought I'd talk today a little bit about inclusive content strategy. A subject that, gets a little bit of talk about, but there's so many different parts of inclusion that I think a good overview of what inclusion means is always a good reminder for everyone. Who am I? Well, my name is AmyJune Hineline. My preferred pronouns are she and her. I am an open source community ambassador for Canopy Studios. And that's sort of a vague, what does that mean? What is an open source community ambassador? I promote our favorite content management platforms. I help everyone give back to their projects. And I help organize and market accessibility talks here. When we're a virtual online meetup where we have speakers and guests chat about all things accessibility. And today's my turn because I believe all information should be accessible. Away from work, I'm a mother and a hospice nurse. And like Carrie said, I like geocaching and hunting for mushrooms and air-cooled Volkswagens. And a good comic just can't be beat. Canopy Studios sponsors my time. They are an open source website strategy, design, development, and support agency. We specialize in data-driven intelligence solutions, and we like to create open source websites that make an impact. And who are you? You're project managers, you work in sales, you run the HR department, you're content writers, you're bloggers, you're marketers, you drive social media trends, and you're coders. And we come from every platform. What is inclusion? Let's take a minute and think about what it means. What is inclusion on a personal level? On a community level? On a global level? Inclusion can mean different things to different people. Sometimes diversity and inclusion are lumped together, so they're assumed to be the same thing. But I don't think that's the case. In the marketplace, diversity equals representation. Without inclusion, however, the connections that attract all those different types of talent, encourage their participation, foster their creativity, and lead to business growth just won't happen. Diversity is focused on tracking characteristics and identities. It seeks to invite people who have been previously excluded based on gender or ethnicity, sexual orientation, ability, age, and any other characteristic that people are labeled with. Whereas diversity refers to the vast array of human differences, inclusion refers to the intent of individuals or our systems to include and support those that have the vast array of differences. Inclusion is welcoming and embracing diversity because of the benefits that it brings. It amplifies the marginalized voices and ideas. Inclusion exercises diversity. It's a conversation that's deepened by diversity. So in my slide, there's a picture of a quote by Temple Grandin, and I really like it a lot. It says, "I'm different, not less." And Verna Myers puts it really elegantly. She says, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Diversity alone doesn't drive inclusion. In fact, without inclusion, there's often diversity backlash. Another quote I often hear is, diversity is when you count the people, inclusion is when the people count. Now, marginalized communities, it's the difference between being tolerated and being accepted and celebrated for what part you share in society. How do we embrace accessibility? First, we have to understand what it means. So what is accessibility? In the context I'm going to talk about today, it's about producing rich, engaging content that is accessible to everyone. Being accessible means everyone can readily access whatever it is you're offering, services and venues, and yes, even written content. Inclusion is not giving special privileges to people, it is being sure that the barriers are removed. So what makes accessible content? I think it's the WYSIWYG that has 4 of these broader parameters to think about when making our content accessible. Make it easy to see, accommodate visual needs. Make it easy to hear, accommodate auditory needs. Make it easy to interact, accommodate motor needs. Make it easy to understand, accommodate cognitive needs. We need to make sure the experience is as equivalent as possible, regardless of what we cannot control. And a few things like that we might not think about are computer type, tablet size, phone operating systems. The content needs to be accessible no matter what device you're using. For content to be accessible, we need to try to use plain language. And I'll talk about these later on, so I'm just gonna kind of like foreshadow here. We need to have clear hierarchy and structure. We need to provide text alternatives, transcripts, captions, and subtitles. And what does it mean to have meaningful content? Inclusivity is at the heart of an effective content strategy. Accessible code may be imperative for inclusion, but all the code in the world doesn't do any good if the content is not meaningful to our readers. And who are our readers? Of course, we have target audiences for some of our content, but really, most of our copy and content should be for everyone. And meaningful content means that we can't make assumptions. Assumptions create barriers. We shouldn't assume a person's political stance. We cannot assume their socioeconomic class. And we shouldn't assume anyone's abilities. Remember, as we get older, everyone becomes more disabled. Our hearing and sight can deteriorate over time. And think of situational disabilities. I recently had a broken arm and a shoulder injury, and using a mouse was extremely difficult. And I work on a computer for a living. But we also need to think of the user on the plane that forgot their headphones, and they want to utilize the closed captioning available to watch a movie on their mobile device. And not every disability can be seen. There's debilitating pain, fatigue, dizziness, cognitive dysfunctions, brain injuries, learning differences, mental health disorders, and of course, hearing and vision impairments can't be seen either. Other assumptions people make are around one's gender identity, sexuality, and their preferred pronouns. Let's take a look at inclusive language. Increasing the inclusivity of our language means striving to understand the ways that language are often unconsciously making assumptions about people. It can be unintentional. It can unintentionally reinforce the dominant norms around all of those things: gender, sexual orientation, race, class, abilities, age, and any other identity or experience. According to an industrial design intern named Shania Garfield, she said, "It is important to note that within the community, feelings and preferences around language can widely differ. As designers strive to think more about engaging communities, it's important to start with the simple question of language." Even the term disability is no longer universally accepted. We should use person-centered language as a general rule. People with disabilities instead of the disabled. And we should avoid negative or demeaning language for people who live with disabilities. For example, people living with HIV and AIDS rather than AIDS victims. People who use wheelchairs rather than wheelchair bound or someone confined to a wheelchair. It's become rather uncommon to use descriptive words like crazy or dumb or lame in the workplace. Terms like crazy or insane make light of mental illness in a way that no ally wants to support. And another one I find a lot is OCD. It's often misused and can be very hurtful. Obsessive compulsive disorder is a mental illness that means so much more than a knack for organization. It's an obstacle that some people have every day. We can use words like clean or organized instead. Other words are always going to be available, not to mention more inclusive. Even the word sane might not seem to be negative, but that can be replaced too with coherent or something like that. So there's these unintentional slurs that have been brought up, you know, from our older relatives or through TV and things like that, and they're always lurking in the shadows. Let's eliminate the word colored when describing people. Let's use people of color, which is a widely accepted umbrella term that includes any non-white person. Gypped comes from the word gypsy, which refers to Romanian people who are often characterized unfairly as swindlers and thieves. Ghetto is suspected to derive from an Italian slang term for waste and dates back to the concentration camps of World War II. It can also be used to label the neighborhoods where marginalized communities are forced to live due to maybe social or economic disadvantage. Classism and racism come into the picture when you call a place or person ghetto. Derp seems rather benign. My kids use this word constantly, but it's used to devalue people based on their perceived intelligence. Intelligence isn't something a person can control, and it has nothing to do with someone's worth as a person. Another aspect of inclusive language is being sure that our words are gender neutral. Use words that encompass all of the genders rather than only the two mainstream genders. For example, people of all genders instead of women and men. Use the word children instead of boys or girls. Siblings or kindred instead of brothers and sisters. And here's a big one. And this next one is hard for me growing up in California. It's a way we've always talked, and I catch myself, but it's simply not okay to use gendered introductions for diverse groups of individuals anymore. The words seem benign, but if someone's annoyed when people call them guys, then the polite thing to do is to call them something else. We can use folks or people rather than guys, staffed or handled rather than manned, or a go-between rather than middleman. And just to put things in perspective, the word mansplaining is also not gender neutral. Let's use gaslighting or the word condescending instead. Then there's the idea of privilege when it comes to inclusive language. We need to use language that does not assume a certain level of education. For example, we shouldn't assume that all people have graduated from high school or gone to college, or they will go to college after high school. We need to use language that does not assume a certain level of financial means or a certain sort of vocation. We need to assume that not everyone in the room is employed. They might not have a stable living situation. They might not be able to afford to meet their basic needs. As the internet opens up to more people, we enter the realm of having a world stage. English as a second language can be a privilege or a situational privilege. This is something to keep in mind when we think about people who might consume our content. We as content authors and designers and coders need to go beyond empathy and include every community as participants in our content strategy solutions. Society and people are hungry to be part of the process in the creation of their world. Folks want to be seen as equal participants, not as afterthoughts. So what can we do? We can create copy that is more inclusive. We can start with the structure by using clear headlines and subtitles. We can break up our content. It makes it more scannable and manageable. We can use shorter sentences and paragraphs, bullets and numbered lists. We can use images and diagrams or multimedia to represent ideas in the content. Videos and images should reinforce the text in your page. We can use pronouns. The user, you. The user is you. The organization or agency is we. This creates cleaner sentence structure and more approachable content. And we can also use the words that our users use. By using keywords that they use, you will help them understand the content a little bit better. According to the website usability.gov, we want to write at the 9th grade reading level. The ideal standard is no more than 20 words per sentence, 5 sentences per paragraph. And we want to use plain language. There's all kinds of checkers out there that can help you with spelling and grammar and also with your readability. I have them listed at the end of the slides. But of course, there's exceptions to this. There's medical papers, white sheets, technical documentation, where using plain language wouldn't be as effective. Headings are not for style. They have a function, and people who rely on adaptive devices depend on consistent and predictable heading structure for them to consume the information a little bit easier. The H1s and H6s, their headings 1, heading 6 tags are used to define the HTML headings on your page. The H1 defines the most important heading, and the H6 defines the least important heading, and they should be nested properly. Okay, so let's talk about entering content. There are 2 schools of thoughts, and I am not going to tell you which one is better for whatever reason, but we have one school of thought where the styling is for the coders and designers and not for content authors. So all of our editors and WYSIWYGs, and a WYSIWYG is what you see is what you get. So all of our WYSIWYGs and editors should be bare minimum. And then we have the other school of thoughts where we give our content authors control of everything and we give them all of the things. And I'm going to talk about both of them. So let's talk about the WYSIWYG bare minimum school of thought. This is where some people think that the styling is for coders and designers, not content authors. The WYSIWYG should be only for entering content. What you allow your editors to modify could affect the theme and accessibility of a site. So restrict the editors to certain theme options. And we should stick to style guides and style sheets for predictable and uniform styling and navigation. My friend Mark, who works over at Media Current, told me, if you allow editors to change colors, how can you be sure it will work in the accessibility realm? Do you really want them to add divs and tables? More to the point, do you really want them coming back and complaining that it looks bad because of what they did? I mean, design is all about consistency, so allowing content editors to go full bore on the content area is just a recipe for ruining it. And the thought is, if you set up your styles properly, then everything should look good without the editors having to do anything. So this is an example of sort of your bare bones WYSIWYG, with the idea that styling is for the coders, not designers, or for the coders and designers, not the content authors. So this WYSIWYG, it looks like it allows the editors to use bold and italic fonts, insert images and links, and it has a style set for quotes. Really not much to it. And then here's an example of one with all the bells and whistles. I don't even know what all these buttons do. It looks like there's options to add bullets, change font sizes and colors, insert tables, indentations, change heading styles. Yeah, I don't even know what all these buttons do. So let's talk about this school of thought. Content editors are active participants. In many cases, they're more hands-on than the front-end developer is going to be in the long run. They're in and out of the site daily. They're editing content. They're editing and entering content all the time. We should train, much along the lines as we train our coders and designers to ensure they understand accessibility, we should do the same with our content editors, because there's options. When they're trained and educated in the fashion as our coders and designers, we can set up the WYSIWYGs to be accessible from the start. We can put in tooltips around the editor with quick links and reminders. We can restrict the editors to certain theme options. Editors can be trained in the importance of structure and contrast, consistent use of links, themes, and images, because our content creators and editors are rad. With the proper training and education, they're able to use the editor in an appropriate fashion. Donna Bungard, who helps organize this platform with me and Carrie, she works with Tandem. She told me to paint pictures with words and build concepts that inspire action is amazing and can be powerful. These people have too much potential to be left unaccountable. So again, they're active participants, and with training, they can produce the same accessible, inclusive content that our coders and designers can create. Okay, so let's take a look at some hiring practices and maybe job advertisement. We celebrate diversity and are committed to creating an inclusive environment for all of our employees. The words in your equal employment opportunity statement, which often appears in the job postings and job pages, are also the words that a candidate will measure you by. Equal employment opportunity, EEOs for short, statements are only meaningful if they reflect the truth. The language we use in our job listing should be consistent with our EEO statements. For example, if the rest of the job ad contains words that attract male applicants, our equal employment opportunity statements might lose some of their effectiveness. Same goes with ads that use words that can exclude protected groups. Maybe words like young or clean shaven. These can exclude some groups and make them feel like they are not invited to apply. It's also a good practice to include an informal equal employment opportunity statement on your career page, because some applicants go directly there before submitting a resume. Accessibility means everyone. So let's talk about events. We need to make sure that the events we advertise are advertised as friendly for everyone. Be sure to include a contact form that people can share their needs. Do they need special accommodations? For families, a nursing room, a family-style bathroom. Are we supporting neurodiversity? For example, people have sensory sensitivity. Is there a space that is dimly lit? Are there spaces without a lot of stimuli, smells and sounds? Is there space and availability to step outside and get some fresh air? Can a window be opened? Is the venue accessible for everyone? Are there wheelchair ramps and elevators? Is there enough time to get in between sessions? Are the doors wide enough for wheelchairs? Can we also ask about our dietary restrictions? This is all copy that should come on our events pages. Okay, so at an event, let's talk about presentations. We need to make our presentations accessible. We need to make them easy to see. We need to address visual needs. We want the folks in the back of the room to see the show too. So we use large fonts and color contrast. We describe images and videos. We make our presentations easy to hear. We address everyone's auditory needs. We make transcripts and captions available. Some venues provide live captioning and American Sign Language interpreters. And we just did a presentation last month that Google Slide now has live captioning, and that's pretty neat. We need to leave room at the bottom of our slides to accommodate captions if they're added later. We don't want the captions to cover any of our content. A good rule of thumb is leaving the bottom quarter of the slide empty. If you look at my slide, I usually use the canopy logo as an invisible line where my content should end. That way, when the caption's adding, it's not taking away from any of the content on the slide. And use microphones. Ask the question, can you hear me in the back? We need to address visually induced motion sickness. We have to make an effort to avoid rapid slide transitions, rapid flashing lights, and rapid animations. Animated backgrounds and parallax effects can be problematic to some of our viewers. GIFs can be a distraction, especially when the slide is left up for any long amount of time. And some types of rapid motions and patterns can induce seizures. We need to address cognitive needs. Dyslexia is one example. We can avoid using heavy text slides and maybe use bullet points to break up the content into easy to read chunks. Subtitles are lines of text that are transcriptions or translations of the speech on the screen. Closed captions are similar, but also include some of the auditory information, such as the sound or music that is relevant that's going on in the scene, such as, laughter or dog howls. Both captions and subtitles are useful as a text alternative to sound and are particularly useful to people who live with hearing impairments. Captions can be either open or closed. Open captions are always in view and cannot be turned off, whereas closed captions can be turned on and off by the viewer. And captioning has universal design benefits for people other than those with hearing impairments. People whose first language is not English, people in noisy airports, health clubs, sports bar. Also, the spoken word of all speakers, when the spoken word of all the speakers is open captioned, additional translation for speakers who have speech impairments is not required. And there's a caption of a show on the CW where it says, "I'm sorry, say again." We need to make sure that our images are accessible. We need to provide captions that are succinct and to the point. Provide alternative text, even for events like presentation. Describe the images or videos as needed. This is helpful for those who have poor internet connections or for folks who have images turned off in their browsers. When alt text is provided for an image, it gives the browser a fallback in case the image can't be seen. And I have an image up here of a box with a broken image with the word dog walking. So by having the word dog walking as an alt text, even the person who cannot see that image knows that there's a picture of a dog walking. Links should make sense out of context. For screen readers, without context, a list of links would sound like, here, read more, click here, giving the listener no idea where these links might lead. And please note that simply giving the URL of the destination is generally not sufficiently descriptive. It's a good idea to restrict the length of the text to a maximum of 100 characters as well. Links need to be displayed consistently throughout your page and be predictable. If you have more than 2 links linking to the same outside source, they should be described in the same way. And remember that links can be paginations, images, anchors, menu items, anything within an article text. And I have an image up here of a link that's differentiated in 2 ways. It has a background of a dark blue text and it's also underlined. So, social media, we also need to be careful about how we approach our content in social media. Who doesn't love to throw in an emoticon, right? Emoticons though, screen readers read them and they read all of them. And this can be cumbersome. And depending on the content of your consumers, sometimes it can be offensive. Let's take a look at this Twitter post I have on the screen. Remember, the screen reader reads all of the emoticons in line with the text. This also includes the emoticons we place next to our handles. So we have Julie Bishop, and she says, Parliament, picture of Parliament House, adjourned till 9/2/15, thanks. At DFAT, thumbs up, and Min staff, hands clap for Stellar Purple Star, Gold Star year. Still more airplanes, Earth, before Christmas tree, Santa. So that can be cumbersome for someone who just wants to know what the bottom line of the information. And hashtags, okay? We want to use capital letters to break up the words in our hashtags. Having said that though, if your hashtag is just one word or relatively short, then all lowercase is acceptable. So I have a hashtag up here that reads NOWTHATCHERISDEAD, all in lowercase. When I first saw that, I thought, Cher is dead? Well, no. After some Googling, Cher was not dead and she's still alive. But what that hashtag was meant to say was, now Thatcher is dead. Had the N in the first T and the I and the D being capitalized, I would have seen that it said, now Thatcher is dead. I don't know who Thatcher is dead, but like I said, I automatically assumed Cher was dead. It comes down to readability. Remember that Twitter doesn't distinguish between cases and searches either. For example, searching for I love Twitter with the I, the L, and the T capitalized, and I love Twitter where it's all undercase, they'll come back with the same results. And images, even in social media, should be captioned or described as well. Many of the social platforms have settings in the accessibility settings that allow users to do this now. Links should be described as well and given some context. And of course, please be mindful of retweeting information that is not accessible. Okay, acronyms. I added a little bit to this slide earlier today, but acronyms can muddle clarity. Screen readers don't recognize abbreviations and acronyms and generally read them as if they were just typical English words. We can look at GTM. It can mean anything. It can mean Google Tag Manager, Guatemala, Green Tech Media. We don't know. Providing context is sometimes enough for understanding what the acronym is. Numeronyms. There was some talk on Twitter about the word A11y yesterday, that they didn't understand what it meant. Well, a numeronym basically is the letters between the first and the last letters are replaced with the number representing the number of letters omitted. So we have the word accessibility. It starts with an A, it ends with a Y. We take out the 11 letters and it comes up with A11y for accessibility. It's considered best practices to give these shortcuts some context. So for unusual abbreviations and acronyms, supply a key with their meaning. So generally what I've seen in copy is like the equal employment opportunity statement. I spell it out first and give the acronym in parentheses afterward. So there's some context at the beginning of the page of what the acronym is. In the past, the use of the abbreviation or acronym tag was recommended, but due to browser inconsistencies, it's difficult to use one tag consistently, and the acronym tag has been deprecated in HTML5. So I'm not sure what the standard best practice is for that now. So what now? Begin, the rest is easy. I pulled this quote out of a fortune cookie 12 years ago. I have it taped to my external monitor, and I probably tell this to someone a couple of times a week. Start with being a good example and an ally. There are tools available to help with content. Use accessibility checkers. There are many, many free resources. Readability.gov, Hemingway app. Again, I have these links listed in the resource section at the end of my slides. Many people are adding their preferred pronouns to public profiles and email signatures to eliminate confusion. and in some cases to normalize gender identities and conversations about them. So share your pronouns. And I'll leave you with something to ponder. It's doubtful that you'll ever be called out for being too considerate. Oblivious communication is a quick way to lose your audience who feel like you are not truly talking to them, or worse, that they're hurt by your message and feel excluded. You can choose between, when you can choose between behavior that upsets some people versus behavior that upsets no one, why wouldn't you choose to upset no one? Why wouldn't you default to neutrality? Language is powerful. We need to be mindful of expressions and content structures that may leave some of our audience behind. And I have a picture up here that just says, be nice. So let's go back to one of our first slides. Maybe your answers are a little bit different now. What is inclusion? And what is inclusion on a personal level, on a community level, and on a global level? Again, inclusion can mean different things to different people. And that's me. You can generally find me at Volkswagen Chick Anything because of branding and makes it easier. And there's some resources, and I'll put these at the bottom of the YouTube video when it goes online. And I want to open up for discussion and questions, if anyone has any.
And I am looking at Twitter, and in the chat bar, I don't see a lot of chatter. We have a smaller group here today. I'm blaming the ice storm. But I know that Deborah did tweet a lot about some of the things that you were talking about today, including how to make your presentations accessible. There's a list of 5 things. And I'm trying to look, see if there's any questions. It's mostly comments here. So that's good. One thing I know I can ask real quick is that you talked about a lot of different options for inclusive content. How would we get started if this was the first time I was hearing about this topic?
Well, I think for me, because, you know, words mean a lot to me, and words, I tend to be very literal, and I think our language is really important. I have friends and family who don't follow some of the norms of society, and working as a nurse for so many years, I am very aware of how words can hurt people's feelings. And, you know, it's hard because people we have this sort of sense that the words we use growing up are the words that we continue to use. Like in California, the word guy and the word dude are gender neutral. So when I go other places, it's hard for me, but I make that effort to not use that word guys. And I correct myself when I do. And people will say, well, why did you correct yourself? And I'll say, why? You know, so a lot of it I think is awareness. And then I also share my pronouns at the beginning of my presentations now. And I have people come up to me afterward that say, you know, I really appreciate that you do that because, and they'll tell me a story about their daughter or someone they know in the community who has a hard time sharing their pronouns, and how when we see it in our everyday things, it might normalize that and make them feel more included when they want to share theirs. So I don't know if I answered your question, Carrie. Sorry.
No, that's good. We're just trying to think of further resources. And I like hearing the stories about why people do what they do. And I know, for instance, you just mentioned the word dude or guys, and I'm in the Midwest and we say guys for everything as well. And I've gotten to the point where I'm starting to retrain myself and not say guys, because I do know it's important. It's a little bit of a microaggression, as they say. So usually it's like guys, ... and ladies. So, but you know, I've been thinking about that even more in context with what you were just presenting. Just even saying guys and ladies, again, I'm only adding that because I'm forgetting to say it correct the first time. But even that is probably limiting. I probably should work harder at saying even more gender neutral kind of pronouns, like you mentioned, saying folks, or I know some people say y'all, maybe depending on where you're from in the country.
But even making the corrections starts dialogue, because maybe after you're done speaking about the topic you're speaking about, someone will come around and ask you why you changed your wording, and you can say, we all, some people might find that offensive, and I want, even the correction is better than not correcting it at all, so and I think that's really important too. But job listings, I challenged a group to run the job listings, and I forget the website right now, but you can run your copy through a couple of online resources that will tell you if your language is gender neutral or not. I think that's important for a lot of people, to especially not especially in tech, but in tech. Sometimes it's hard for marginalized communities and even women to apply to a job because the language isn't welcoming, like the word clean shaven, that's just one, like, okay, I guess I have 2 chin hairs I can shave. Okay. But you're making your target audience seem very small, and it's harder, I think, for people to apply when there's that gendered language. So.
I agree. It looks like Deborah does something similar. She says she uses folks or everyone instead of guys. So yeah, there's a couple of different options there. But yeah, I think retraining, once you've heard a talk like yours today, AmyJune, and you kind of start to think about it, that's awesome. It's like that awareness, but then it's that secondary thing of, old habits die hard, and trying to retrain yourself, especially if you're an older dog in the world. But yeah, I love that. I love that you've given us some ideas to think about that. And it would be really cool if you found a link later. We can link to one of these tools you talked about today, where you can test your content against inclusiveness, because I didn't know that was even a thing. So that would be a good tool in an arsenal of especially people who are writing, not even just job descriptions, but even blog content or something that they know is going to be, maybe even their presentation, their next conference presentation. I feel like there could be a lot of general use cases as well.
Deborah also put in the chat that one of the hardest things for her to retrain to use the word they instead of him and her. And that's challenging. I agree too. So
you mean just like I did when I was talking about Deborah? I noticed it after. I can't win sometimes. I worry sometimes that we've gone, the opposite spectrum, right? Where it's like we worry too much.
Right.
But I think maybe speak to that a little bit. Maybe just, talking about how effort and trying is at least a piece of that.
And it is, because, I'm going to go back to a story. I'm older, and I have teenagers, and they came home one day with a friend of theirs who identified as a girl growing up, and then they switched and became non-binary and were using the phrase they. And it took me a long time to wrap my head around it, because it was a new concept. This was several years ago to me, and retrain myself for that. But I appreciated having that in my repertoire of experiences, like having someone close to home that had that identifies on neither one of the quote unquote norm spectrums, but that's another one I struggle with, because I do make assumptions in everyday situations, and I go to that default of the binary labeling. So, but I've also I handle some Drupal camp Twitter accounts, and I've taken to writing pronouns on the bottoms of their biographies, and I put they them at the bottom of all of my Twitter camp Drupal Twitter accounts now to sort of normalize that too, because they get a lot of traffic. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it's like making that normalization and having, if people see it, and then the next step is people asking you the questions, and even like now I'm stumbling over my words, but at least the conversation is starting and the awareness starts to come. But same thing with the ableist language too. It's hard. We all have things that we grew up with. I have to admit that I use the word lame, and I have a brother in a wheelchair. So
you should know better.
Yeah. So for me, and then it's really hard because I see everyday people using it and I want to correct them, but I don't want to be this, this language police either.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think it's us taking the time to find creative and sensitive ways to educate people we're around too, and not call them out publicly on Twitter, or things like that. So.
Yeah, I think there's some areas of forgiveness in the sense of when you try. I mean, that's better than somebody who isn't even thinking about it or trying to correct those things. But yeah, it is sometimes hard with the habit. But I do like this idea that you mentioned about adding pronouns to places that are more that you don't see pronouns as much. I think when I first saw pronouns, it was at a conference and people were wearing stickers, or they had added it to their badge. And so it was definitely a conversation starter. But now I'm seeing it pop up places like you mentioned. Maybe you have it in your LinkedIn profile, or you have it in your Twitter accounts or some other social media. One thing I've seen it, and just recently, was a job. Somebody was looking for a job, and on their resume, they had their pronouns as well. And I thought that was pretty cool because, again, it opened up that kind of conversation to begin. And by that person doing it, it would normalize it, right? If the next time one of us applied for a job, we put it on our resume, again, awareness and making it visual. And I just think this is all great, great ideas, ways to keep going. So do you have any other places that you would recommend, or any other groups or anything that you belong to currently that you would want us to maybe check out to learn more about this?
Sure. I'm not sure what sort of platforms people are using, but I default back to my Drupal community. And in the Drupal community, we have a Slack channel for diversity and inclusion. And every Thursday, we have meetings where we talk about issues like this. And we talk about norms and what we can do as a group to sort of, I'm not in the leadership role, but everyone's invited to these Thursday meetings to talk about different issues. And a lot of it's awareness, and people will be sharing tweets, so that's diversity and inclusion. In the WordPress space, there's also diversity and inclusion. And the accessibility stuff, I really didn't get into much of the semantic and structured markup and things like that. But there's a ally channel, A11y, which we talked about, the numerum accessibility, and they've got that in the WordPress space and in the Drupal space, and they have their own channels as well. So I think, let's see. I do some volunteer work with my local youth, and so I lead by example. I try to, as the older person in the crowd, use language, and when I correct myself, I talk about why. So that's always a good thing, is leading by example. So,
yeah, that makes sense. We have a little comment here from M. Salome, talking about avoiding the language and police dynamic. They say, I find it helpful to tell them after the fact, as if they would appreciate knowing. So a friend once used the word Philistines to mean uncouth among a group of Palestinians. I told her after the event had ended that it was derogatory. She was glad I had told her. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's another piece to add to that puzzle, is if you do see this, say something. You can say it to the side. You don't have to make a big deal about it as well. It's just, if you're uncomfortable, or you think someone else might be uncomfortable with that kind of language, ableist language, or not inclusive language, then definitely say something. I did something similar once when I referred to being in the same tribe as Shania Twain because she made some weird kind of comment, and someone pulled me aside later on Twitter and said, well, do you know this about her? And I said, oh no, I do not know that about her. Okay, I'm deleting that tweet and never referencing that as well. I mean, that's a really kind of weird example there, but it kind of one of those things, like even you're joking, right? And to you, it's a joke and you didn't mean any intent or harm, any ill intent or harm, but sometimes it happens. So I'm really glad that that person spoke up and told me, you know, hey, do you realize what you're saying?
Right.
Because a lot of times I think that happens also is that people don't even know that they're using ableist or non-inclusive language. So it is important.
And there's so much of it. It's overwhelming. Like when I felt it was hard to put some of these words on slides because I don't like to say them. But they're littered in our vocabulary. And the more I was looking into, the racial slurs and stuff, it's the more I realized depending on where I grew up, what relative would say what and what nationality that was, a slur for. So it was just amazing, the more you know, right?
Although I think those are called idioms, right? Or something where
yeah.
you're just you're saying a phrase that doesn't have the same context that it was originally intended to have, where you say something, but words are powerful. So it's very important to kind of look into that. But I think that's great. I don't see any other comments or questions so far. Again, there's some on Twitter, especially from Deborah. She has some recaps of this. So at this moment, unless AmyJune, do you have any closing thoughts that you want to leave us with?
I don't. Like I said, just be nice. I think that's the moral of my story. Just be mindful of who's in your audience, or not even necessarily in your immediate audience, of who could be in your audience later as well. Yes, you're giving a presentation and you have an audience, but then there's the presentation afterward that's watching the video online. So just be aware that, everybody is our content consumer. So
that's good. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.